For those of you that somehow don't know, and yes, I'm making 2 videos on this topic as it turns out, because way more has happened since my original take on it, but the word that I will now have to describe as the C slur, because I'm streaming this on Twitch, has been banned on the platform. Both Vaush and Hasan, Piker, Hasan being by far the largest left-wing political figure on the internet, both took big bans for it. Vaush's ban is indefinite. I know Fawn also got an indefinite ban, and she's from New Zealand. That word doesn't even, like, mean anything there. And yeah, Twitch has been rolling it out very harshly, not taking into account anything having to do with, like, cultural barriers or even, like, making an announcement about the change in TOS. They just seem to just be taking action against it now, when they previously didn't, and they're going in hard. They're going in for permabans and indefinite bans right off the bat. Of course, we don't actually know how long these bans are going to be, because Twitch is a dog shit website with dog shit moderation that doesn't actually tell streamers, like, here's what you were banned for exactly, and here's how long you're banned for. So usually they just like to say, it's an indefinite ban, don't count on getting your account back. Which is just great when your job is to be on Twitch, right? Anyway, so Twitch decided to go full 1984 or whatever, following some discourse. And this discourse was, ironically enough, started by Destiny and Hasan having a bit of a back and forth on Twitter. Well, actually, not even going back and forth on Twitter. It was actually very single-sided on both sides, I guess, where neither of them were engaging with each other directly, but both talking shit about each other in their own separate areas. Destiny talking shit about Hasan on Twitter, and Hasan talking shit about Destiny in his Discord or whatever. Not a big fan of that type of engagement. That's slimy, but, you know, to be fair, I have no doubt Destiny would have debated Hasan if he came forward, so that was probably Hasan avoiding Destiny. Anyway, with that said, the discourse got started. Is the C slur that you may associate with saltines, just to make it very clear what I mean when I say the C slur, is it a slur? And is it as bad as, and or should it be treated as bad as, the N-word on platforms like this that enforce TOS in regards to your language and what words you use? Well, I think these are 2 separate questions, and I think the answers to them are different, and I don't think the answer to one of them necessarily means the answer to the other one is what you might think it is. Now, I want to say this right now. The C slur is not as bad as the N-word. It just isn't. I did a little bit of research before this stream, and I decided to look into the history of the word to see, like, exactly where, like, how far back it goes, because I had my understanding of what the word meant, and I know a lot of people think it's referencing saltines, or referencing the food. I don't even know if I can mention the food snack anymore. I don't know if, like, the food snack is now, like, I don't know. It's got to be context-based, but regardless, turns out the earliest found instance of that word being used to describe somebody as a pejorative towards somebody actually dates back to Shakespeare, which I thought was really surprising. In modern day, I think a lot of people do associate it with, like, saltines being white, and so when you call a white person that, it's because crackers that you eat are white. I guess I can say it if we're talking about that, right? A lot of people probably assume that's where the term comes from, but at least in modern parlance and the origin of the term, it doesn't seem to come from that. Some people have argued it comes from white slave owners cracking whips on like working like black slaves, and that's a very, very common perspective where it comes from, like whip cracker, like cracking the whip. And this, yeah, that's obviously an area where it comes from, but there's also some evidence that suggests the term comes from a pejorative for poor white people in like the Northeast during the 18th century. And that's, you know, like not anywhere close to the same context or the same meaning as it would have if it came from, you know, whip cracker, right? So there's actually not a set understanding as to where the word originates. We actually don't know fully like where the word originates, but I do think, at least here in America, a good way to say where it comes from is probably going to be the whip cracker one, because that seems to be the version of the word that's had the most, or the version of the word with the backstory of the word that's had the most impact, or the most impact in our culture, I should say. So that's where the term comes from. Or at least those are the three areas where historians seem to understand the term comes from, right? With that said, the word has evolved over the years to become a pejorative for white people. As a meme, almost the reverse N-word, right? We all know what the N-word is. It's almost seen as like the reverse N-word because, you know, it's a slur or it's a pejorative, a racially based pejorative for white people who, I mean, if you compare white people to black people, have had it a lot better in this country and have even been the ones that perpetuate the systems of oppression for non-white people broadly, but especially black people. And so when you try to compare a pejorative used by an oppressed group to refer to said oppressed group, to try and draw an equivocation between that word and the slur that the people in power who've set up systems to oppress a certain racial group, to try to draw comparisons or to try to draw a direct, comparison, we'll just go with, between those two things, to many people is insulting. But we do have to sort of cut through the emotion behind this argument and look at the logic of it, right? As leftists, I think we can all agree, we don't want to encourage people to judge others based on unchangeable factors about themselves. I think that's really, at the end of the day, I think that's what the left, socially speaking, is all about. We are trying to prevent people from being discriminated against based on things that they cannot change, things that they were born with, right? And then, of course, there's obviously, people on the left try to make things that you aren't born with accepting as well. But generally speaking, it seems like there are groups of people who don't like people just based on how they were born, and they want to oppress people based on how they were born, and then there's people who want to not oppress people based on how they were born. And, in the case of conservatives and racists and whatnot, it does seem that they are usually the racists who want to say slurs and they want to oppress people. Now, with that said, does that mean that it is in some way infringing on your morals and on your principles as a progressive to use those words? No, I don't think so. My position on this is just the same as it is with any type of racial or edgy humor. I think you can make transphobic jokes, racist jokes, I think you can make homophobic jokes. I think you can make those jokes and they can be funny if you put work into them. The problem is, and the reason why many of you think that probably isn't even possible, is because racists and transphobes and homophobes don't actually put any effort into the humor they create about the groups they talk about. It's always the same repeated jokes, the attack helicopter, 1350, suicide rates, etc., 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 right? Always the same talking points. It gets old, humor, after a while, repetition just stops being funny, right? After you've heard it enough. That's why every meme ever has died out, right? In terms of its relevance. No meme lasts more than a couple of weeks in its, prevalence, right? So, overuse ends up killing memes just as much as it makes them, blow up. But conservatives are incapable of that good kind of humor. But I have heard, and it is possible to create good racist, homophobic, transphobic, anything like that humor. I think if you want to find something like that, you can look at PKA. And the podcast PKA, Painkiller Already. When I watch their podcast, they make jokes like that. But then 2 minutes later, they get serious and talk about an actual topic. Like, talk about a topic like that seriously, and it's clear they're not joking when they take a non-horrendous position on an issue, right? They'll make racist jokes or homophobic jokes or transphobic jokes, but then when it comes to their actual position on an issue, it's very clear what they actually believe, and it's not actually bigoted, right? At least most of the time. Like I said, regardless of who is the target of said humor, I think it is possible to make it good and funny. The problem is when that humor is used either to justify, to normalize, or, as a third thing, to make an argument for a certain idea. Hypers in chat, if you don't dislike Dave Chappelle's show because you were offended by his jokes. Hypers, if that's not why you dislike Dave Chappelle's recent special, it wasn't because you were offended by his jokes. Chances are, if you didn't like Dave Chappelle's newest special, it wasn't because you know, thought the jokes were too offensive or whatever. Chances are, it was most likely because the jokes that Dave Chappelle were making, well, they weren't really jokes. It was just stand-up. It was comedy, but it wasn't jokes. A joke is when you say something, you know, ridiculous or untrue or zany or out there or whatever. You're not supposed to take it seriously. The absurdity of the suggestion of the punchline following the setup or however format you want to go about telling a joke, that is what makes it a joke. When a comedian goes up on stage, like for example, when George Carlin goes up on stage and he starts ranting about Republicans or starts ranting about insert group of people, and he goes on his big long rant and everyone's laughing their asses off, you realize he's not joking, right? He's being funny in the same way that, you know, Dave Chappelle is funny when he talks about things, but he's not joking. There's a difference between being funny, being a comedian, and making an argument that is humorous and making jokes. When I make jokes on my channel about a conservative, well, yes, I'm making jokes about a conservative, but they're not jokes. Usually they're, you know, actual claims. If I say, I bet this guy probably hates women and has never had sex with a woman in his life, yes, I'm making jokes at the guy's expense, but I'm not kidding. I believe that. I'm making an argument with my joke. I'm couching an argument in humor. And that's what Dave Chappelle does. And that is what I would argue makes racial humor a problem, or racist humor a problem, when it's used to either normalize racist thinking, similar to what we see in like the alt-right rabbit hole, where you start hanging out with people that are constantly making racist jokes, and now they've been normalized to you, and now you're a little bit more receptive to actual racist ideology, because now you think it's funny to say the N-word all the time, and you've gotten a lot less, you know, opposed to racist words, right? Anyway. And then, of course, there's obviously the argument of, is it influencing people in a bad way, and is it justifying that? So when the left makes jokes about white people, and the left makes jokes about saltines and Ritz and all those things, is the left doing any of those three things? On a broad scale, just generally. I'm so sorry. I just ate some food right before starting stream, and I can't stop hiccuping. Is this happening when the left makes jokes about white people? Well, white people aren't being oppressed by any systems of oppression that specifically go after them for their race. Don't get me wrong, the white working class is certainly, you know, oppressed for the fact because they're working class, not because they're white. But besides that, white people in this country just not really oppressed on the basis of their race. Basically, every group other than cisgendered, straight, white men, every group outside of that, at some point, and even today, just based on how they were born, on a base level, has it worse than groups that fall into that one narrow category. I mean, obviously there's outliers. Obama is black, and yet he was the president and is very wealthy. I'm not saying that Obama has it worse than, you know, the white meth addict that lives in the corner of the street, you know? That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is that if you see a homeless, like, white person on the street, you wouldn't exactly attribute that to them being white, or anything that could have been connected to them being white. You see a black homeless guy on the street, and you're like, I mean, that could have been the result of systemic racism. We know the studies, we know the data, we know about the generational wealth gap between white and black people, and that sort of racist humor is used against that group a lot of the time to punch down at that group being black people broadly in America, right? Whenever people make racist jokes about black people, or when people make racist jokes about Asian people, etc., right? But that doesn't really exist for white people. So in regards to the humor supporting harmful, oppressive systems when it comes to, like, white jokes, well, it's not really there. You can't really make the argument that white people are already getting enough shit already, so do they also need to get punched down on, right? If a black person makes jokes about white people, 99% of the time it's probably punching up. And just if we look at stats and you know, the economic side of the average American income, right? The average American income, if you're black, is much lower than if you're white. So if you're white making racist jokes about black people, you're probably punching down, right? And if you're white or black making jokes about white people, you're probably punching up. This is always the case. If Obama, of course, was making jokes about a white heroin addict on the side of the road, then I probably wouldn't be okay with that. That's probably punching down. But you know, that's the talk about, like, is the humor supporting bad systems? Is the humor on the left about white people contributing to harmful racist narratives? That's the second thing. Is the left making actual racist arguments and couching it in comedy in the same way the right does when they make racist jokes or use racist words, or for example? Is the left couching that in a harmful narrative to try to make it funny? Well, I'd argue no. 99.9 repeating % of the time, no. However, and I'll point this out, there are people that are said to be on the left that you could argue do this. For example, Black Hammer. The Black Hammer organization is, well, everybody who's a part of it, not really a big fan of white people. I'm sure you've seen their stance on white people. You can genuinely pay them reparations in the form of hundreds of dollars to become like a pledge to their organization and not have to, I guess, be... Basically, you pay them and they absolve you of the sin of being white, is more or less how it works, right? And you could say that they're left-wing. You could say they're left-wing because they're progressive, or they claim to be progressive, I should say, or because they're, you know, or they claim to be fighting for racial justice. But I would argue no. Every instance of people who are said to be on the left that have some anti-white racist bias almost always end up being far right in reality. Like, for example, Black Hammer, the example that I just brought up of a group of people on the left who have some level of power. I'd argue Black Hammer is the only, like, organized group I can think of that has power in the left that hates white people, and they are currently allying with the Proud Boys. They're black separatists. They believe in ethno-states and segregation. They literally said that they've announced they will ally with white nationalists and neo-Nazis if it means that they achieve their common goal. They and the neo-Nazis have a common goal of achieving segregation. They both think it'll turn out best for their own individual race. They're both racist. They both want to separate races. They're both bigots, and they're both far right. There's just not a real contingent of people on the left that are pushing actual harmful narratives for white people. Are there cringy 15-year-olds on Twitter that say, I hate white people? Are there edgy streamers like me who make jokes about white women fucking dogs? Sure. Absolutely there are. Point to one instance in which this discussion, this behavior, or this narrative or language is causing real-world harm. Point to one instance. It's not. And even after saying all of this, after setting you all up with everything I've said so far, I'm still going to hit you with the big twist ending to the video. I still do, while I don't think the Twitch ban for the C-slur, or frankly, just generally how Twitch has gone about doing it even, while I don't agree with it, one thing I will say is that I do think the left should probably steer away from using any racially motivated insults. From Gusano, God help us if Twitch is using that, to Saltine, okay? I think the left should avoid using these words, generally. Outside of, like, very funny humor, I think the left should avoid that type of rhetoric. There's a reason why we criticize the right with their humor, even when, or not even the right, there's a reason why we criticize non-conservatives who make edgy humor that we know is humor that's racist or homophobic or anything like that, even when it's funny. There's a reason why they still get canceled and they still get, like, crap from progressives. The reason for that is, even if there isn't any real harm being caused by people using a slur, well, at the end of the day, we still agree that using certain words and drawing those boundaries based on race and identity and whatnot, we still recognize that even when done in jest, it can help and contribute to sowing division between different groups of people. and possibly even stoking racial animus. And that's not a good idea. That is not something the left should be trying to achieve, when right now we need to be building, coalitions and working together to fight against the, torrent of the far right, But that's my opinion. I am of the opinion that using racially based insults is bad regardless of what group it is. I do not like, and I'm going to take a very strong stance on this, I do not like Twitch taking the action that they've taken. There's a difference between having a moral position on something and having a position that you feel comfortable enforcing on others, right? Like, for example, I love MILFs. Frankly, I won't date a woman who's under 25 years old. Frankly, I might as well. I'm 22 now. I can up it to 27 at this point. I won't date a woman who's under 26, 27 years old, okay? And that's my preference, right? But I wouldn't enforce that rule on other people, right? I would never want, the U.S. government to change the age of consent to 27. That's never something I would want. That would also be a nightmare scenario. But no. There's certain positions I can hold and opinions I can have that I don't think should be applied to everybody, and especially not with the threat of some action taken against somebody. And I don't think using the C-slur is just doing what you would I don't think it's causing enough harm to justify this much of a fire bombing is the only way I can describe it, of so many large left-wing Twitch streamers, especially with completely permanent bans out of nowhere, with no announcement of the changing of TOS, no announcement of enforcement of something that literally hasn't been enforced for the last 10 years or whatever. I don't know. I thought that was some serious bullshit, but other than that, those are my thoughts on the whole situation. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please consider leaving a like both on the stream and on the video, as YouTube streams are helped out a lot by having likes on them. So if you're watching right now and you haven't already, please leave a like on the stream and on the video, as of course, likes help the videos too. And if you want to see more from me, please consider subscribing, ring the bell icon, as well as following my second channel, link in the description, called Only Zans, where I'll be uploading some, fun content that I feel like uploading on there pretty soon, so consider subscribing. And of course, if you want to see more from me on social media, you can follow all of my social media linked down below in the video description and the stream description, including my Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and my fan Discord, which is a free community of people that you can join, where, I hang out in the voice chat in there. I play video games with you guys. We do watch parties and movies and stuff like that. We have a good time in there. And of course, finally, if you want to support me financially so I can afford Christmas presents for my girlfriend and my cat, as well as paying the bills, this is my full-time job, please consider donating, subscribing, or gifting a sub over to my website, xanderhall.com/live, donating, media sharing, or TTS donating through Streamlabs, or supporting me on YouTube and Twitch. But no matter how you support me, whether it be through a like, a comment, a view, or even just a financial donation, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again very, very soon.